Hi, Ed. Welcome back.
Hey, I'm very happy to be back.
Yeah, sure you are. You are now at Azure, Microsoft Java team, right?
That's right. I'm working to take the work that we all did in our community, which is a really exciting, great community that's been doing enterprise Java for a very long time, and take that work and make it available all across Azure.
Okay. So you are focusing on enterprise Java or just overall Java or server-side Java or
I'm focusing on Jakarta EE specifically, and Java in general as well as a part of that.
Oh, so your job at Azure is just so your official task assignment is focused on Jakarta EE?
That's correct. Yes. Enabling Jakarta EE app servers to run very well on Azure in all of the different ways that people want to run Jakarta EE on Azure.
Yeah, that's actually interesting because I mean this is like the old Sundays.
Well, that's why I consider myself extremely blessed. In our previous conversation, we talked about luck and career things, and I have had so many great opportunities. But when I just 2 weeks ago, my team and we shipped an offer in collaboration with IBM and another offer in collaboration with WebLogic. I'm sorry, with Oracle rather, to expose their respective app servers, Liberty in the case of IBM and WebLogic in the case of Azure, on various runtimes in the Azure marketplace. So Kubernetes or Red Hat OpenShift or Azure VMs. So you had asked about an overall shape, and you came up with this very nice document that listed containers. And you'll put that in the show notes. But basically, if you look at that document, you'll see if you're running this kind of thing, then you want this Azure service. And then the left column, it would talk about dynamic scalable workloads, and then you'd say functions, or maybe Azure Kubernetes service. It basically had a table of all of those different mappings. And my job is to work with my team and also with our partners, IBM, Red Hat, and Oracle for now. And we're also working with Payara. They have a really exciting thing called Payara Cloud that we sort of did some consulting and review of. So that's a really neat offer. But the satisfying thing is to know this code or this service is representing the work that I had a small part in with Servlet and JSF and all the other things. But all of us, you yourself included, have worked on over the years, and the expert groups and the JCP and all of those things.
Yeah. What's interesting, I didn't know that you are actually aware of Payara Cloud, because this is a distinct offer. What they did is just crazy. I would say it's completely unique, I would almost say. So, maybe we can start from ground up, because we have containers right now. And so previously we would say Docker containers, now just containers, because Docker is just a product. So if I get a container, let's say, it doesn't matter what's inside actually, right? Because this is a Java code, who cares? It is exposed port 8080. If you dedicate some CPU and memory, it will just run. Now, I could take that, and I would say the most basic service I can get from Azure would be ACI, Azure Container Instances, right?
Right.
So, how this works is the setup is pretty simple, I would say. I need some JSON-like configuration where I say, this is the container image, this is the CPU, this is RAM, and it just runs. The problem with this service is their cluster is not available, right? So to my understanding,
exactly, there's no orchestration.
So this is like a single container on your machine, right?
That's right.
So, okay,
it's basically a cloud way to do Docker run.
Exactly. And maybe I could run this in a cluster, but this I would have to set up load balancer something before. So there were lots of manual work, and this is probably not worth. So, and so what is the next service? To my understanding is this is Azure App Service, right? This is more like ACI with cluster availability or cluster.
Not exactly. No, ACI. I'm sorry. Azure App Service is also not something that supports classic Java EE, Jakarta EE clustering out of the box. It's still underneath the covers. It is doing Docker run, but it's an older orchestration technology that predates Kubernetes even, but it has a number of great advantages, mostly along the realm of ease of use. So a recent feature update to Azure App Service did allow specifying an arbitrary Docker container to run that. Prior to the introduction of that feature, the only way to do it was to pick a specific runtime stack, and underneath it had its own technology that would wrap that in something which eventually became a Docker container. And then when they had that capability internally, they're like, well, we may as well surface this now. So in fact, when we have JBoss EAP on Azure App Service, it's using that technology. But still, when you run it that way, there's no clustering built in.
No clustering. What I meant is you can run 2 Docker containers in parallel.
Yes, you can.
Two instances. On ACI is not possible, right? So because there's
correct.
So I mean, for me, clustered means HA. It's not like the Docker containers are not aware of each other, but the health checks are checked. So if one container dies, it gets restarted, and I get basic HA without Jakarta E, Java E cluster.
Correct, right. But some enterprises would use, for example, JTA, or they would require, sticky sessions with session affinity and actual proper app server clustering, like that was in the classic app servers of old. And that is the thing that we get with the work that we're doing with IBM and Oracle, and that is basically. Well, it's using a technology called Azure Applications, and it's an ARM template, or Azure Resource Manager template. We like to think of it as executable guidance.
Yeah.
So a lot of what my team does.
But you are already too fast. You are too fast. So what I would like to do is, to introduce all the possibilities to run Java first.
Let's do it. Let's take a tour.
We have ACI, which was a single container. Then was new offer Azure App Service. So what it meant is more usable because I could just use my, let's say, Payara without clustering, but I could 2 load balance instances. If they are stateless, this would work perfectly.
Perfect.
With JSF, I had a problem because I need sticky sessions. So I will have to configure the load balancer properly with sticky sessions, right?
Right.
Very good. So,
but you can do that even with a stateless app as long as you need sticky sessions that or causing the traffic to always be routed to the same node. Yeah. And then if one of those nodes dies, then the person loses their session. But that's oftentimes acceptable.
Yeah. This is what I'm actually doing. So this is what I wanted to talk with you because on Azure, we use ACI for smaller apps, Azure Functions, which we will cover in a second, and Azure App Service, which is recently available with how to call it, custom Docker images, right? Where you can exactly. And you mentioned AKS, Azure Kubernetes Service, and and you also mentioned that the Azure App Service is older than the Azure Kubernetes Service. So my opinion of Kubernetes is a little bit strange because what I see in Kubernetes is a great way to create your own private cloud. So you can create with Kubernetes your own cloud. The problem is, it is complicated. So you will need to know lots of YAMLs, Helm charts, and I would say it is more complex than Java was before. If I run on Azure, I try to avoid Kubernetes actually, because ACI or Azure App Service are simpler and cheaper to run. So I would say for me, Kubernetes is more like lift and shift, where I say, I have Kubernetes on premise. I have no time to rethinking. So I pick my, Kubernetes workload and push it to Azure. This would be like, classic Kubernetes use case. But if I would start fresh, I would consider AKS or Kubernetes at the very last because it is too complex and too expensive.
Sure. Right.
So you are with me. So that's interesting because we had lots of discussion with that, with architects and.
Well, let me share a new announcement that was just fresh from our recent Build conference, or was it Ignite? I get them confused. The one that happened in November.
Okay.
I think it was Build. We have a new service called Azure Container Apps.
Exactly.
And the basic idea of Azure Container Apps is take the sweet spot of Azure Container Instances and Azure Container Registry and put them together and allow something that gives you more power than either of ACI on its own, but less complexity than the full open-ended Azure Kubernetes service.
Yeah.
So I am with you that the thing that I think is so interesting, and I'm very glad to have been working in this profession as long as you have, and see things evolve. And when we look at Kubernetes, we know, okay, this is just the same thing that have been trying to solve for the last 20 years. It's just a new version of it. But each time we go around the loop, we, as an industry, we get better at, standardizing, not always with an actual standard process, sometimes with its de facto, sometimes it's just the way things work out. But with this current run around the bend with Kubernetes at the pinnacle of it, we do have a way to sort of represent the entire IT estate in a software artifact. And this is something that is really new and exciting to be able to get everything into one data plane in some sense with Kubernetes at the end of the day. So that's why we see, take a look at OpenShift. OpenShift itself started as a different containerization technology, and then they reworked it to build it on top of Kubernetes.
Yeah.
And that's what it runs on now, but it didn't start out that way.
But from my developer perspective, I have different perspective, because if you think about this, what I'm creating is container, Docker container. And I don't care how the container is started, how the ports are assigned, and how it's load balanced. This can be done by Kubernetes, or it can be done by something else. And if I go, let's say, to Azure, I get the AZ CLI, so I can manage my stuff, and what's behind, I don't care. Now, if I would use Kubernetes, for me it is worse. Why? Because I get, the native Azure CLI plus the Kubernetes user management, ingress controller, and all the YAMLs. So I get both at the same time. So I would say in public cloud, is Kubernetes maybe not as simple, or I don't even see the point. There are specific use cases where you already have your own operator, or you build packaged software and you would like to run it somewhere. This is just perfect. But I'm talking about custom apps I'm building. Kubernetes wouldn't be my first choice.
Sure, I agree with you.
But the interesting part is, if I would run in a private cloud on premise, Kubernetes is the way to go, or OpenShift is easier way. Also, I would pick OpenShift because it's easier to use, it's more convenient, but it's Kubernetes under the hood. But this is a completely different story, because there is no orchestrator on premise. But Azure already has several, ACI, App Service, and Azure Container Apps, which is in preview right now.
Right.
And what you will need on Azure is ACR, right? Azure Container Registry is a kind of a Docker registry, which very simple. And you push it to the Azure Container Registry, and then the usually ACI or Azure Container Apps. I didn't try it yet, but this is the next idea. Or Azure App Service will pick the container from this image from the container and just launch it. And Azure will care about, health checks, liveness, and so forth. And funny fact, I always hear in the architects, from the architects, like Kubernetes about portability. But if you look at the amount of deployment, descriptors, and configuration you have to provide, and if you compare, let's say, Azure Container Instance with Fargate from AWS, ECS, this is almost the same configuration. And in both cases, it is tiny. I would say I would spend less time of migrating the AWS to Azure than migrating Kubernetes. So this is actually a funny fact, It
is. You're right, because we want to have, when people say portability, and this was another thing where we go around the wheel.
Yeah.
Back when we were starting out, assuming a base level of J2EE, portability meant you could go from one app server to the other.
Yeah.
Now, portability means you can go from one cloud to the other.
Yeah.
And the point you just made about, okay, well, if you pick Kubernetes, yes, you can take your Kubernetes estate, plain vanilla Kubernetes, and move it from Azure to AWS. But the amount of complexity and config files you need for that to move it is a bigger surface area.
Yeah.
So if you compare the app service
Yeah.
on Azure with the equivalent offer from AWS, yeah, it's there's a smaller set of config files, so you just it's rewriting them isn't that hard.
Yeah, no kidding. 30 lines of JSON. This is what we're talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Interesting. So and of course, the portability of Kubernetes is not even an issue. What we always get is, security, right? How security works is completely different across the cloud.
Yeah.
And provisioning. This is the next part. People believing like Terraform, you can, write one script and deploy it everywhere. This is not how it works because Azure Terraform resources look completely different to AWS. So it's like, I would say forget about portability. If you pick Azure, go to Azure. And if you pick AWS, go to AWS. And multi-cloud is, I would say, harder than Java EE on application servers was before.
It is. Yeah. Sure. Because there's so many more concerns that come underneath the umbrella of consideration. Java EE always left a lot of things unspecified or vendor specific, you know?
Yeah. And you mentioned something interesting, Azure Resource Manager, ARM template. But what it is like a declarative possibility to declare your state of the cloud, and it will set up the entire environment for you. What you can do?
The domain is called infrastructure as code.
Genau.
And, Terraform is one way to do it. And Microsoft, as you said, has a very large investment in providing Terraform access to its control plane. But underneath everything on Azure is the ARM template. And it is a gigantic JSON file that basically specifies these are the parameters. These are the resources that you're going to be installing or running, and then the outputs that you are going to send. Yeah. And there's an interesting technology on top of ARM
Bicep.
called Bicep. Yeah. Exactly. And so the WebLogic on Kubernetes service offer that we built is using Bicep.
That's interesting.
But it's a very one of the first large-scale things that we've done with Bicep, and it's been very helpful because the complexity of understanding a gigantic ARM template, and when they allow you to do nesting, right? So you can have one ARM template call another, but it's extremely difficult to understand.
Yeah.
So with all of these things, and this is a term that I came up with back in the JSF 2.0 days, the concept of a complexity tax. Mm-hmm. It's vital to all of these things. And just taking the example of the app service versus Kubernetes, the complexity tax of app service is much less than with Kubernetes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So as an architect, I think we need to tell our teams really the important thing is the complexity tax. How much of it is there? How do you manage it? How do you keep it under control?
Yeah.
So Bicep lets you do that.
Yeah.
A little more.
Funny story with Kubernetes, or not that funny. So in a project, they use a lots of microservices. And because there were lots of them, they used Helm charts. So this is like a templating language to generate, like what did Xdoclet, 20 years ago. So now it's Helm charts. And the problem was, of course, if you have Helm charts templates, they cannot be that different. So every microservice, there was, the same slots and everything looks the same, but they were not even able to deploy each service individually. So they had, to deploy everything at once because of the template structure. And then I asked the question, then what's the point? Why you have so many microservices? You could actually merge everything to one monolith and just ship it. It would be way easier. And they thought about this and they say, you are actually right. We are doing microservices just of the sake of microservices. But if we merge everything becomes, more manageable, which could be sometimes a solution. Another interesting technology, so we already covered ACI, Azure App Service, Azure App Container Azure Container Apps, sorry. And now a hidden service, which is really interesting, Azure Functions.
Right.
And Azure Functions supports Java.
Yep.
You can write Azure Functions in Java, and they wake up. It's very similar to message-driven beans, I would say, except that then they also have a result, so return value, and message-driven beans were void. And the interesting part is what we actually did is there is an official plugin from Microsoft, and what it can do, it can make the Azure function available via HTTP.
Definitely.
So you're not that excited, but this is actually great news, because what we did, Quarkus, you can use Quarkus and deploy a MicroProfile application, which is a, JAX-RS,
of course,
as an Azure function. And this is a complete different business model.
Yeah, that's awesome that we can do that. So basically, it gives us the ability to do JAX-RS with functions as a service. It's really great.
With CDI injection, and it looks what we did with, Payara or Glassfish. Now it's possible as a function, and you get paid per invocation. And now we are in the serverless land. So what it means is, whatever we talk about clusters, it is less applicable because the functions can scale up and down, and and it works nice. And what struck me is that there is an official no Microsoft Maven plugin, which is fun. It's interesting, right?
That's what my team in Shanghai works on. Yep.
Okay. So you are not that excited. I'm very excited. Of course, we did it, in Shanghai, but and it
is great work, and it's really awesome that our team has done it, and we're so tuned in. That's why coming to Microsoft and working on Java was a great step for me. I'm very happy that we're having such a great team here. I also hope we get a chance to talk about Microsoft joining the JCP. That's another big deal.
Yeah, we will, because we covered this right now, and I think we covered AKS will be the last one. So we covered the main technologies which where you can run Java. And then you mentioned, let's go ahead with the JCP, because this is interesting, Java community process. So, or the Eclipse process, what you joined actually?
We joined JCP, but as a person who has been a long JCP contributor and now Jakarta EE, I would hope that we can expand upon that. And, when the customer data indicates it's a good move and we have a good business fit, I could see that expanding upon that to move into Jakarta EE is something that I'm interested in. We'll have to see. Microsoft has made a point of telling the world that we are customer obsessed, and it is actually very, very true. So in order for investments to be made, they have to be requested and demonstrated a need for by the customers. And only then will we go down the road and say, okay, we're going to put money behind this investment. So in the case of JCP, we felt, and the world knows, that we have produced our own OpenJDK build, that we have our team that's led by Martin Verberg and Bruno Borges and many other people. Kirk Pepperdine as well is involved in there. Lots of Java champions on this team. Monica Beckwith. Oh, I did want to talk about that. The concrete thing. Monica Beckwith made some contributions to OpenJDK to port to ARM64. And that was one of the things that demonstrated, well, okay, we're investing in this. We should probably make the relationship formal by joining the JCP. And that's one of the reasons why we did so.
Okay, this makes sense, because this JCP strategy here is more like JDK level.
Yes,
and
correct, it is.
But there's no JCP, with Jakarta EE. There's nothing going on in GCP anymore. It's just like Eclipse.
Of course, right. So there are certain technologies where we have some interest. Like the talk I gave at Build myself was about JMS. So as you know, JMS 2.0 hasn't been updated in a very long time. There is a new JMS spec coming in Jakarta E10, but there really aren't any changes in it. The expert group has been pretty quiet to the point of like nothing, actually.
Okay.
But Microsoft has a thing called Azure Service Bus and Event Hubs, and the premium tier of that supports JMS 2.0. So it's a JMS implementation. And if we're going to continue to evolve that, it might make sense, possibly, to get involved at Jakarta EE and suggest some things on the JMS spec. No?
Do you actually know
speculation.
Mr. Ashish Chabria?
I don't know.
I had a podcast with him, and he's the PM of the Jakarta messaging service on Microsoft Azure. So, so we had a discussion, and it was actually a great discussion because Microsoft implemented the entire JMS spec, and it.
I know.
Yeah. This was for me, and I asked him, we implemented this and this and this. This was like, he just implemented down the entire spec, and it runs on Azure Service Bus, I think is the name.
Yep, that's right. That was the topic of my build talk.
Okay, interesting. And what's also an area which of interest would be, this is a common question from my clients, is how to integrate authentication and authorization of Azure with customers directory properly, that you get the JSON Web Tokens and you can pass them, to Quarkus or whatever. This is also where I would say this is like gray area, because it is clear from Azure what to do. I mean, you have the AD, Azure Directory Service, which integrate with backend. But I would say, like a common pattern or spec extension could be interesting, I would say.
Exactly. And I think that would be another area where there would be a customer-obsessed business case for Microsoft getting involved formally with Jakarta EE to say, okay, let's standardize this. Let's put it in there so it's in the official thing. But on the aspect of Azure Active Directory integration with Java EE, the very first thing we did for WebLogic on VMs, we had an integration with secure LDAP. So we have some guidance that we published, and we also have this in our WebLogic on Virtual Machines marketplace offer, where you can specify an Azure Active Directory instance, and it will, if you have configured it to have secure LDAP set up, it will take that secure LDAP and populate the realm of the WebLogic so that it has the identities from that realm already built into the WebLogic.
Okay, so now let's focus more specifically on your work, because it seems like what you are doing, you are integrating the common application servers more tightly with Azure.
Right, we're making it easy for people to use them on Azure. Right,
and what it means, make it easy. So what it means is like an application server as a service that I can say, give me a WebLogic and you get it, or
it's kind of like run your own service. So you go to the Azure Marketplace, and this is all enabled from a business perspective by the bring your own license model that IBM and Oracle have. So if you have both of those, there's calculations that are done, see how many vCPUs and your existing license entitlement will carry over to the same sort of runtimes that we have on Azure. So both of the vendors have pricing guidelines for how those are portable. But assuming that all is sorted out and you've got your proper license compliance figured, you can go to the Azure Marketplace and say, okay, give me WebLogic on AKS, and we will have this offer that installs the WebLogic Kubernetes operator, and you can also even point to a WAR file, and it will take that WAR file and build a container image around it and put it in the Azure Container Registry that is also deployed by AKS, and then run the whole thing for you. And when it's all done deploying, you have the thing set up with AKS Container Registry, the Kubernetes operator installed, and everything is running for you. And then you can use further operations like patch, for example, using the custom resource definition that the WebLogic Kubernetes operator defines. And
you said why you would like to push the WAR to a Docker registry. Usually would deploy.
Well, it's an ease of use capability. If you want to just get something up, fairly quick and dirty, if you would just want to have, like, say you have the sample app that we use is the old cargo tracker app. So you build your cargo tracker and you upload it to Azure Storage, and then when you deploy it, you can say, okay, this is the app I want you to wrap WebLogic and Kubernetes around and deploy and make available.
Okay, because WAR, usually it would be enough to push it to the blob storage This is Azure Blob Storage, and
you have to push it to blob storage because that's just where the ARM template can get access to it.
Exactly, but it's not Docker container, right? Because Docker would mean
no.
Okay, perfect.
But we containerize it for you.
Exactly, but you are containerizing WebLogic for me, right? WebLogic with the WAR.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So, but it's not like Payara Cloud, because Payara Cloud is a really very interesting offer. What the Payara Cloud did, by the way, it runs on Azure, to my knowledge.
Yeah, sure. I know. I talked to Rudy de Boucher, and they've, I reviewed it for him, and we gave our endorsement of it. We have a blog post. Reza wrote a blog post about it. So we love Payara Cloud, and I think it's a great offer.
Yeah, and why it's great, because if you think about this is the I would say the exact opposite of what Quarkus is doing, because they say, okay, just think about differently and let's do the clustering on top of Kubernetes. And what they are doing is if you upload the WAR to the server, they will start spin-off Payara micros in Kubernetes pods behind the scenes, and the Payara cluster will manage the pods instead of Payara servers. Which I would say this is a great idea, right? If you think about this is like serverless server.
Right.
Because you only have, your workload, your WAR, you push it and it works.
Yep.
And can you also use Payara Cloud from Marketplace? Or is it what's...
I believe they're working on that. I believe that's the thing that's how they're going to expose it as an Azure Marketplace offer. That is the thing that, it's like the iTunes store for Azure.
Yeah. So you worked on WebLogic. Then you mentioned
but
what other service?
But we also have Open Liberty. Okay. So we worked with IBM, and we have an offer that will, you could run Open Liberty on Azure Red Hat OpenShift or Azure Kubernetes Service. Mm-hmm. And it's a similar idea where you go to the Azure Marketplace, you say, I would like to have Liberty. You can choose ARO or AKS as the deployment runtime. And in either case, the offer will install the respective operator. So there's a Kubernetes operator for Open Liberty, and it goes on both places. And you can specify a Docker image. And the case we don't allow a WAR update, because you just actually assume that you have a Docker container that is ready to run your Open Liberty application. And then you just give it the tag, and it can push that. Immutable
infrastructure, of course. No WAR updates, right?
Right.
Okay. Right. So we have WebLogic, Open Liberty. What else?
We have the JBoss EAP on App Service. Mm-hmm. And right now, one of our colleagues at Red Hat is working on some guidance to validate and instruct people about how to do Open Liberty how to do JBoss EAP on Azure Red Hat OpenShift as well. But that'll be our first step there, is just to have guidance that you can follow. So the marketplace offers that we're doing is really just executable guidance that you can deploy. So you can either read an article and do the steps yourself, or you can go and deploy the template, and it will give it to you for you.
Mm-hmm. I had actually a discussion with, I forgot the name.
Teresa,
exactly.
Yeah.
About that longer, because I wondered why you're not starting with White Hat. I guess there's maybe some issues because Red Hat would like to have JBoss. But I would say from the business perspective, would make sense even for Red Hat, to allow Whitefly. Because just if someone from Red Hat listens, because I can tell you there are lots of clients, if they run critical workloads, they would just buy JBoss anyway.
Exactly. I mean, it's the same thing. So we already got this figured out with the IBM side, and the interesting thing is the insight that this gives me into the rationale for the IBM acquisition of Red Hat, right? There's a lot of important technology that IBM is betting on there, mm-hmm. and that's why the share price was so big. And you can see that in the manifestation of how much effort is being put into OpenShift and running the fully licensed app servers on top of that technology stack. Mm-hmm. But what we did with Liberty is similar. You can run either WebSphere Liberty or Open Liberty. And most customers are going to be like, "Oh, I'm a huge enterprise workload. Of course, I'm going to run WebSphere at Liberty."
Yeah,
anyway,
exactly.
Because
yeah,
and the same thing could be said for Wildfly versus EAP.
Exactly. Because if someone would like save money, they will probably run on how it's called Azure Container App Container Service. I forgot the name again.
Container apps, Azure
Azure Container Apps, or even run on virtual machines blank, and this would be even cheaper. It doesn't make any sense from the maintainability perspective, but if someone would like save money, why not just do it, right? So that you cannot, exactly. So okay, and so this is what you're working on, like integration, like more tight integration with Azure services. Like for instance, so what are the integration points? I could imagine file service, blob storage, right, and AD, or where do you have to integrate? So what's
out of the first, the biggest one, of course, is database.
Yeah.
So the offers that we are working on all have a similar path, which basically is give us the JNDI name, give us the JDBC connection string, give us the username and password for the database, and we will set up whatever container-specific stuff needs to be done to set up that data source. So we have the same result because we're leveraging Java EE APIs. Once you do that, then you can have JPA working just as fine as you ever would, because you're just having a JDBC data source that is allowing you to create an entity manager, and away you go with your existing.
But is there anything to do? Because the JNDI, you only have to inject the environment entry from outside, right?
Right. There isn't much to do. There's some app server specific configuration that we do in each case. But there is another service that was just recently announced called Azure Service Connector. And that might be someone I would like to introduce you to as the PM for that. His name is Jin Shi. He's a colleague of mine, and he's the program manager for this Azure Service Connector.
Yeah.
So it's basically Azure Services as a service, which is really meta. But it's a nice idea because it allows you to offload the work of connecting a thing to this team. So, yeah.
Okay, what I think is a kind of a proxy, right?
Kind of like a proxy, yeah.
The
value add is that service is agreeing to pay the complexity tax, so you don't have to. They're dealing with understanding all the different adapting things, and more importantly, keeping it running over time as the underlying services evolve. Because we've observed that as a problem. Sometimes, like another service that people integrate with is Azure Redis service. So we have some guidance that lets you use JSR 107 JCache as the API to interact with Azure Redis service. And we are using Redison, or recommending Redison, as the guidance for that. But those services evolve and change over time, and bugs can be introduced, or new service pathways can be added. So the value proposition for Azure Service Connector is they're going to mitigate that and have it, a guaranteed. It keeps running even if the services are evolving over time.
So this is more like enterprise offer, where I would say, okay, I'm giving to you something like a JDBC API for Redis from Azure team, and we guarantee you it remains stable for the next 3 years or 2 years or whatever. Right. And exactly. And it will map, the stable Azure API to unstable Redis API.
Right.
Like anti-corruption layer, right?
Yes, it's exactly what it is, an anti-corruption layer. I like that.
Yeah, and this sounds meta or maybe a little bit over-engineered, but what you could do with that as well, care about authentication and authorization inside the layer.
Yep.
This is the huge win, because every call goes through the layer, and the layer could pass username and password to the backend.
Right.
And the next thing,
well, that's why we have managed identities for Azure resources. That's the state-of-the-art authentication identity technology is managed identities for Azure resources, and that's We use this for both of the WebLogic and OpenLiberty on ARO AKS. You can have either user-assigned managed identities or system-assigned managed identities. And in the case of our offers, we have to create a user-assigned managed identity because that's needed to run the deployment script that does the ARM template configuration when the deployment happens.
This is why I wanted to ask you about Azure Function, because if you're running on Azure Function, and let's say you would like to call a Postgres database running on Azure, which is available. So connection pooling doesn't make any sense because the Azure Function goes up and down. This is like request scoped, So something like the services you mentioned before could make sense then, because the proxy could keep the connections, and I'm just connecting to the proxy, and it will forward the connection to the Postgres. Of course, I need a JDBC connection, not a proxy connection, which makes interesting. Redis is more REST-like. JDBCs are harder. Are you aware what would be the template, or how you call it, guidance for accessing from Azure Function a Postgres database on Azure?
I am not aware of that guidance, but I don't know if that doesn't mean it does not exist. It might exist, and I'm just not aware of it.
Homework, if you find something, drop me a mail. I will put it to the show notes. Would be great.
Sure.
Because this is also interesting work, because serverless I consider as future of the cloud. Not necessarily because we like, this serverless notion. What I noticed in management circles, that I really like the idea, pay as you go. So that at the end of the month, you can give the bill and say,
of course.
Every transaction costs you that much costs. If a service is popular, costs you more. If a service is not that popular, it costs you nothing. And this is what they love. And because
I gave a talk at JavaOne 2014 when I was working at Oracle at the time, and it was when we had first developed the multi-tenant capability of WebLogic to run. And at that point, you had sufficient commoditization of the entire cloud infrastructure where everything could be itemized and billed per use. And that's what made that thing alone is the single most important economic driver for the growth of the cloud. The thing you talked about, enterprises want to see everything exactly quantified so you can budget for it and manage the cost and know where the money's going. So now it's available. That level of transparency and granularity is now available. But the thing you mentioned about serverless being the future of the cloud, I like to say that we've been trying to do away with boilerplate code for as long as people have been making boilers. And that's a very long time. But you can just see the progression over time from Java EE, J2EE, in the right order there. But serverless is everything has been taken away, just the pure function. All the other infrastructure is, you don't think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. But what's the problem is, the serverless makes only sense if it's event-driven in long term.
Right.
And you would write the applications differently, and you should depend more on the cloud services. Then it makes sense. I'll give you an example. What you can do, you can, for instance, write application. If you upload something to blob storage, an event is created, and I could listen to the event, do something. I could, for instance, initiate deployment automatically just by listening to the event. In a not event-driven architecture, I would write application which runs on application server and scans the directory. And if it finds something in the directory, do something with it, which defeats the point, because this is like the service has to run all the time. I pay all the time for it. Is more complex. And this rethinking, this is what should happen. And I would say in 2014, we had multiple problems in the cloud. First, I don't know whether Direct Connect or Private Link was available on Azure back then. This is the possibility that I can directly connect with VNet. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, we call it Express Route.
Express route, exactly. Express route. And this is very important for larger companies because they would like to have, they consider the cloud as a private cloud. This is like extension of the data center. This was not available before. And therefore, I never use, any client because most of my clients were completely not interested in it. I mean, to have public,
right.
With express route, which means this is like, a direct connection to the VNet, which is how to call it VNet, like your private logical network. Exactly, a virtual network. You can access this directly. So that was the first, I think, main driver that larger companies say, okay, now it becomes a little bit more interesting. And the next one, that all the major services are emitting events. Azure Service Bus, your blob storage. So if you're listening to the event, you can build how is it called, Azure Logic apps, right? Where
yes.
Yeah. So where you can just listen to the events and do simple things just out of the box, like reading file, converting the file, storing the file. So you don't have to write app for it. And this is the rethinking has to happen,
I know. And I like to take this at a level further and think about how that would, if we assume that's how the world works, how would education, teaching people how to use services change? I mean, I kind of feel like computer science education has not accepted the event-driven world, and I think it needs to, because if you learn how to do imperative programming from the very beginning, and then you're like, oh, well, actually now the real world is actually everything is event-driven, you have to kind of go through that mental mind shift.
Yeah.
If we just taught people how to do event-driven from the very beginning, then that would be a lot better way to get more powerful apps.
My impression is all talks I heard about event-driven, they're a little bit dogmatic, I would say. Like reactive programming. So and it doesn't have to be that way. What I think about event-driven programming is, if you look at the business, it is, I would say, what I'm saying, event-driven is more like a selfish. I'm just here, I'm speaking with you, so event happens. And right. I'm not interested whether someone, sees the event or not. This event is just persisted. And if this event is persisted somewhere, Azure Service Bus, an Azure function, which is interested, could listen to the event and do something with it. And the main difference to JMS is, in JMS, I'm actually sending messages exactly to you. I know you. I'm sending messages to you and expecting that you're reacting to it, which is a better way of remote procedure call, right? So this is...
Right. This, I think, ties into RSocket. I was reading about RSocket recently, and they have... Martin Thompson is involved in this.
Okay.
And there's several different models of interactions. One of them is fire and forget, and another one is subscribe, publish, subscribe. So the fire and forget model is more like what we're talking about.
Yeah. The main difference maybe is in JMS, the topics are not persistent. In Kafka and similar technologies, they are. So what it means is if you have topics, if you consider topics as a database, this changes everything, because you have the entire history of events and you can react to them.
Yep.
This is the main difference. Okay, so what else are you working on? So, I mean, this is already a lot, right? So we covered WebLogic, OpenLiberty, Azure Functions a bit, Azure Service Bus.
And we covered Wildfly and EAP, JBoss EAP.
Yeah.
I think that's my main focus. I also, as an architect, I have a role of advising other teams that are doing other stuff. So, I mean, I've given some feedback and direction to the Visual Studio Code for Java team. And then Azure Services, for example, deployment scripts and resource providers, as a user of those things, have a hand in saying, okay, this is the feature that we'd like to see, finding some future capabilities that we'd like to see in the ability to build stuff for Azure Marketplace, for example. There's when you build a marketplace entry, you have to use this JSON-based UI description technology that lets you do a declarative UI that is in the portal. And coming to this from JSF was a big step down. Because I'm like, oh my God, this, you mean I have to write the whole thing in JSON, and there's no tool support, there's no, and the set of components that you have is very, very small. So that's something that I would like to work with that team and help them expand that offer.
After moonwalk, we do sunwalk now, right?
Sunwalk. Right.
Sunwalk. Oh.
Well, we don't want to. I just watched Dune over the weekend. We don't want to walk too fast.
Yeah, exactly.
The sandworm would come.
Exactly. So, it was a pleasure again. So, I would like to invite you back to talk, on your next achievements in Azure Clouds or Azure Sun, where people can find you on the internet.
Well, let me put out a little blog post that I just published today, and that we touched on a lot of the things in our talk here today. Back in September, I had the chance to give a keynote at a conference in Switzerland at ETH in Zurich called Workshop Tage, and I did a keynote there called Innovation, Gratitude, Compassion, and the Cloud. And this blog post is a summary of the keynote. And you can find that in the show notes. Let me just put it in the BlueJ chat right now. Is there a chat? Yes, there is, right?
Yeah.
Chat. Here we go. Let me put the link in there so you have it for now. There we go. And that's my blog post, and that's where people can find me easily. Or Twitter @Burns.
@Burns. Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
It was a pleasure.
Likewise. See you next time, Adam. Have a good day. Bye-bye. Ciao.